Hi, folks. Thanks for logging on. I'm Greg Warmoth. Welcome to this debate between the candidates running to represent a key Central Florida district in Tallahassee. It is State House District 44. I want to welcome incumbent Robert Bobby O, a Republican. How do you say it?
Olszewski.
Olszewski, good. Bobby Olszewski. I like to call him Bobby O. He currently holds the seat. His challenger, Democrat and former state senator Geraldine Thompson. WFTV, in conjunction with the Commission on Local Debates, produced several of these candidate face-offs in what we call the Central Florida Debate Series. Many of you are watching live on WFTV.com. Full versions of all of our debates, including today's, will remain on WFTV.com through Election Day. First, some ground rules for the candidates. Both of you will have 2-minute opening and closing statements. We'll alternate questions between the two of you. You also have 60 seconds to respond directly, and rebuttals will be up to 60 seconds as well. Before we do that, thank you both for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. It's great that you all have agreed to be a part of this. This is important for the voters to be able to learn a little bit more. We did have a coin flip, and we're going to start out with a 2-minute opening. Bobby O, if you don't mind, I'll call you that so I don't mess it up. You get to go first.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you for everyone joining us tonight. And I know many of the men and women here in your viewing audience have friends and relatives up in the Panhandle, and I just want to extend my most heartfelt thoughts and prayers out to all the victims of Hurricane Matthew. And please know that the state of Florida is going to be there to help recover. We have a track record of doing that, so help is on the way as we keep you in our thoughts and prayers. I have the honor of representing Florida House District 44 in Tallahassee. This is my home. I've lived in this district for almost 40 years. I have previously served as a Winter Garden City Commissioner, where I was served for 4 years, and just got elected, ironically, yesterday in a special election last year to serve my hometown district up in Tallahassee. I'm proud in just 1 year being able to pass 3 of 6 bills off the House floor and bring back almost $3 million of appropriation back to House District 44. I think it's important that we focus on education. My mom is a former educator and public school teacher. My wife's a current public school teacher. So we need to make sure that we have the best education available for our children, as well as allowing them to have jobs and training, making sure they have the training of today for the jobs of tomorrow. And we have wonderful resources here in our state, particularly in our district, and we need to make sure that we have the investments in our infrastructure for our natural resources to make sure that we have a wonderful community to live, work, and play for generations to come. And I have the experience working in this community, for this community, and providing results for my hometown and your hometown, where we both look to raise our children, have a productive life, and making sure that we have that quality of life always here in District 44 in the state of Florida.
Mr. Olszewski, thank you very much for that 2-minute opening. Now it's your turn, Mrs. Thompson.
Thank you very much. I am a wife of Emerson R. Thompson, Jr. I'm the mother of 3 adult children and the grandmother of 4 wonderful girls. And my children and grandchildren are products of the public schools of Florida. And 95%, as my children did, attend public schools. So I am an advocate for traditional public schools, and I don't think that we should funnel money to experimental schools where there's no accountability and neglect 95% of the students who attend traditional public schools for the benefit of 5% who attend schools where there's no accountability. When my granddaughters go off to class, I don't want them to be fearful that there's going to be a gun incident at their school. I have been designated as a gun sense candidate, and I want to see universal background checks. I want to see a ban on assault weapons, and I want my children, all children, because all of our children are at risk until we make gun sense something normal in the state of Florida. I also want to see us leave this planet that we all share as a place that can sustain life. We see fish kills, algae blooms, all of the things, the pollutants that's going into our waterways. We can't live without water. So I want to see a planet that's left for my offspring as my ancestors left it for them. So these are some of the reasons that I'm running after having served 10 years in the Florida legislature. And Representative Olszewski says that he passed 3 bills out of 6. He filed six bills as the prime sponsor, the named sponsor all of those bills died in committee. None of them made it to the floor of the House to be voted on. He was successful in putting forward some appropriations.
All right, that is our first opening statements from both of you. We'll start with our first question. Mr. Olszewski.
Greg, can I respond to that, please?
You'll be able to here in just a second. That is her opening. You are both experienced elected officials. Senator Thompson has served in the state Senate and state House, as she mentioned, and you are currently serving in the state House. What legislative achievements are you most proud of from your career in Tallahassee?
Well, thank you, Greg. And there's no question I did pass 3 of 6 bills off the House floor here in my first session as a legislator. And I'm proud to say that child sex trafficking victims will receive specialized care in hospitals and residential treatment centers because the bill that I passed in the House, it also passed in the Senate. And I also passed a bill off the House floor that would allow lost and found merchandise at our theme parks and our restaurants and attractions, instead of being held by the venue, to be able to be given to local charities and nonprofit organizations. And the third bill I passed off the House floor was making sure that all our MPOs and transportation planning organizations come together to have a plan for all the gridlock that we see in our community throughout the state. And you can go on the State House website to see the 3 of the 6 bills that I passed and almost $3 million of appropriations that I brought back to my district in just my first session.
Mrs. Thompson, you were, again, 10-year legislator. Bobby Olszewski has had this now for the last portion of that particular term. What would you want to do in terms of achievements that you've had, and what would you like to focus on in your time if you are to be elected?
One of the things that I'm most proud of was to help a 78-year-old man who had spent 22 years in Florida's prison for allegedly poisoning 7 children under the age of 10, his children. His name is James Joseph Richardson. And after his neighbor, who was in failing health, confessed to her caregivers that she had come over to warm up food for the children and put poison in the food, all of the children died. Mr. Richardson, after 22 years in prison, was released, had no Social Security, had no 401k, had no children, didn't know where the wife was, and I was able to get funding to get him compensated for wrongful incarceration. That's one of the things that I'm most proud of. And one of the things that I want to do going back is to look at the incentives that the state of Florida gives to attract companies to come to the state, and those companies operate for a brief period of time and then close their doors.
Your time is up there. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but now the next question goes to you. Mrs. Thompson, Florida's legislature is only part-time. Who are you when you're not in session, and what do you do during the other 9 months of the year?
I'm the founder of the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture, and I spend my time there documenting and sharing of very poorly shared history that's part of America's history and Florida's history. And so that is what I do when I'm not in the legislature.
And that would be what you would continue and find time for to build that.
Oh, absolutely. It is a calling, and it's something that I am totally committed to. And I want to provide you the bill history that we talked about, and you'll see of those bills that where Mr. Olszewski is the named sponsor, all of them died in committee.
All right, well, she has brought it back up. You didn't get a chance to respond to that. Before I ask you about what you're going to do in the session when you're not in session, I want to ask you to respond to what she's saying regarding those bills.
Please go to myfloridahouse.gov and you will find the answer for yourself that I passed 3 of my 6 allotted bills in the Florida House this session. And when I'm not in Tallahassee representing our community, I'm the proud father of a 2-year-old daughter and a husband of my wife, Allison, a public school teacher here in Orange County Public Schools. And my day job is I serve as a Florida Partnership Consultant for the Special Olympics Florida, where we have 50,000 athletes around the state and making sure that they have health care, inclusion activities within our society, and making sure that we have a better life for them and their families throughout the state of Florida. And I also serve as an adjunct college professor as well.
Mrs. Thompson, why do you keep going back to failure of an attempt to help people as part of his record, whether he disputes that or not? Because you as a legislator know that not everything is successful.
Oh, absolutely. But I think there's a big difference between being a co-sponsor of a bill and seeking an appropriation and actually passing a bill. And after he served one session, he should know that there is a difference. An appropriation is for a finite period of time, usually for a budget year or a calendar year, and you have to go back and do it all over again the next year. So that is not passing a bill. And so the reason I keep going back to it is that I think it's a distortion of the record, and I brought the bill history with me with regard to his passing bills in his first session.
30 more seconds on that topic, because this is obviously something that is rubbing her the wrong way and you as well. I'd like to get this cleared up.
Well, you think after serving 10 years in the Florida legislature, you'd understand the difference between a bill that you file and then an appropriation bill. We get 6 bills. I passed 3 of 6 from the House floor, and I also had 3 funding requests go through in an appropriation. One for the city of Ocoee for their largest employer in Health Central Hospital for over $2.5 million. For Lake Sumter State College, about I think $350,000 for a lot of our residents in District 44 attend the Claremont campus. And then also for the town of Oakland, help them with their water treatment, making sure that they have a healthy and safe water system and helping preserve Lake Apopka. And those are my 3 appropriations bills that are different from the 3 of 6 filed bills that passed.
All right, so this is sponsored bills of Representative Robert Bobby O. Olszewski, and where you're pointing this out, these are dying on the floor.
No, dying in committee. They
Dying
never
committee.
got to the floor.
Okay, and these are the ones that you're saying in yellow here?
Yes.
All right, so these are the ones in yellow. Review those and please respond to the documents that she's brought.
The ones in yellow here all pass, and I just mentioned them. And these are not my bills that are highlighted there. I don't know what those are for.
Those are bills that you co-sponsored. These are where you are the named sponsored.
Right, these are my appropriation bills, and I just mentioned there it is for Lake Sumter State College and for the town of Oakland wastewater collection system. I just stated that, and those are my 3 of my appropriation bills that passed. And this is, kind of, confusing because anyone can go on the House website and know it's in the record, it's in the budget, and to focus on something so trivial is kind of mind-boggling from a legislator that served 10 years in Tallahassee.
Well, there is a very clear difference between an appropriation and between a bill. A bill, once it's enacted, becomes law going into the future unless it's amended or repealed. An appropriation is for just that particular budget year. He keeps calling these bills. These are not bills. He was able to put forward some appropriations requests that got folded into a larger committee request, and it was the committee that pushed these bills to passage.
All right, we've discussed that, I think, long enough. You can hand that back, and we can put that back over here. We'll set that aside. All right, Mr. Olszewski, Hurricane Michael made landfall in the Panhandle. You touched on it in your opening. What do you believe the role of the state legislature should be in storm response and preparedness? Last session, the House Select Committee on Hurricane Response and Preparedness issued a report on recommendations after Irma and Maria. Where do you stand on the role of the legislature?
Well, just under the leadership that we've had for Governor Rick Scott has done an amazing job in preparing communities and bracing for the worst. And just like we said off camera, the loss of life that you would expect after seeing a Category 4 storm hitting landfall didn't happen. And I think that's because of the state of Florida and the response that we've had. Based on what we've done in Irma, the committee that met throughout the session, we earmarked $230 million in the Florida House for Florida recovery from Irma, and I know the people suffering the effects from Hurricane Michael are going to see the same. And that's what we need to be doing, is being proactive, because we know we live in Florida. We have to prepare for storms when they arrive. And then obviously once the storm hits, we need to get the quality of life and the standard of living back up to where it was before as quickly as possible.
All right, for you, Mrs. Thompson, same basic question. What role do state legislators have in storm response and preparedness?
I think education is a big part of what needs to happen. And during my time in the legislature, we educated citizens with regard to what they needed to do to be prepared. whether that is making sure that they have an evacuation plan, that they stock up on the things that they need. We gave tax holidays for the kinds of things that people would need to buy to be prepared for hurricanes. So I think communication, as well as making sure that the funding resources are there for recovery. I have 2 adult children who live in Tallahassee, and I've been on the phone with them starting the weekend. And so I know that the city of Tallahassee, working with the federal government and others, they are getting ready now to bring that city back online, whether we're talking about power or making sure that people are taken care of with regard to generators, et cetera. So we've done a lot in educating people and making sure the resources are there.
All right, next question for you, Mrs. Thompson. District 44 contains Disney World, Universal Studios, and SeaWorld, arguably the most popular tourist destinations in the world. What unique challenges do you think this imposes on your district, and how will you address them in the state legislature?
Well, transportation is the biggest problem, because we not only have to move people from the airport and wherever they come to get to the theme parks, but we also have to be concerned about our residents who need to get to work, who need to get to school, who need to get to church. And so we are going to have to plan long term for transportation. I was in Portland, Oregon not too long ago. It reminded me a lot of Orlando, with the exception of the fact that they have rail, and outlying communities have a place that they can park and ride. So we're going to have offshoots, ways for people to move from one place to another, and we're not going to be able to build our way. We can't pave enough roads. We say the ultimate I-4, but that is not going to be adequate given the growth that we're seeing in House District 44. I served on the Senate Committee on Transportation, so it's an area that I am aware of, and it's an area that needs to be addressed.
For you, Mr. Olszewski, same basic, you can rebut that or respond or expound on what you think those challenges because of all of those tourists in that one area that is in your district.
And you mentioned the 3 theme parks, but you also have International Drive, the Orange County Convention Center, and we welcome 72 million visitors a year to Orange County, and almost all of them, come to Florida House District 44. And the biggest thing that we can do is making sure that we have the amenities and the family-friendly atmosphere to keep attracting these guests, because so much of our economy depends on our tourism and hospitality industry. And I think that's important to continue to make those investments to making sure that our quality of life remains strong here in the district, that our families have jobs, and making sure too that Ms. Thompson is correct on the transportation side, but that's why you have Brightline and private companies having rail transportation going into the airport, coming down to down to Miami, and we're also going to look at having the Orlando to Tampa connector as well. And I think that's what we have is private investment working with government, making sure that we have results to maintain our quality of life, our family-friendly atmosphere, and continue to have visitors coming to visit Orange County and District 44.
Where do you stand on the public input into the rail and having public dollars for that?
That's already been invested with, Sunrail, and I think it's, indicative of what Governor Scott has done by opening it up private investment, because I think there needs to be the more public-private partnerships, because when we see multiple public and private entities come together, good things can happen. Look no further than the second largest university in the country right here in UCF on what they do with partnerships, both public and private. We need to do that too in transportation, as well as various other activities that can provide a return on investment and a quality of life.
I'm up for you, Mrs. Thompson. You touched on Sunrail. You touched on being in Portland. Do we need the state to get more involved in helping us, or is it the public-private partnership that your opponent talks about?
The state's going to have to make an investment in addition to encouraging private investment. And we see with All Aboard that's going to be coming from this area going down to Miami that there is an interest from the private sector. But the state will have to make an investment. And through tax dollars that go to the Florida Department of Transportation, we see that we can make a difference using those public dollars. And so it just takes political will to do it.
All right, it sounds like both of you have the will when it comes to improving our roads or our transportation or whatever the case may be. And that concludes our first series of questions. We're not nearly done yet. We'll be back in a moment with more questions about our state budget spending, how party affiliations play into decision making of these two candidates, and perhaps the most pressing issue in our area, affordable housing. Those questions and more in just a few moments. Welcome back. This is the second part of our special debate for an important state house race, District 44. We're here with the candidates seeking that office, the incumbent, Robert Bobby O., that's what's on the signs, Olszewski, and Geraldine Thompson, who was in the House before for 10 years. Thank you both for being here and helping inform voters about your positions. In this second segment, we start off with you, Mrs. Thompson. What is the one issue you believe leaders at the state level are currently overlooking? And if elected, how would you adjust Florida's $89 billion budget to address that issue?
Well, I think that the state has gone off in the wrong direction when it comes to our environment. And people are now saying, you know, what about the algae blooms? What about the nutrients that are washing into our waterways? And we have seen our water management districts politicized and people appointed who really are anti, I guess, environment. And we have seen the state of Florida not want to be regulated by the Department of Environmental Protection. And so Florida is having some serious problems with regard to climate change and rising sea levels, et cetera, and we have not addressed it because we have put blinders on. There have been agencies in the state of Florida that were forbidden to even use the word climate change. And so it's as if we're saying if we don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist. But it does exist. So that is an area we absolutely have to pay attention to.
All right. And for you, Mr. Olszewski, your response to the state issue that is being overlooked doesn't have to be the same one, of course. And how would you change some of the appropriation of that $89 billion budget?
Well, I'd like to follow up on the environment and my record and making sure, like I mentioned, investing in the town of Oakland and their water treatment to help preserve Lake Apopka. I sponsored a bill with State Senator Victor Torres, making sure we preserve state lands for Florida wildlife. And just this week, I was in the town of Windermere to help the Florida Environmental Protection Agency, presenting the town of Windermere with a $100,000 grant. And at the same time, you know, what's going on with the algae bloom is not a problem that we created. It's a 150-year-old problem that happens when you kind of mess with Mother Nature and trying to straight the Kissimmee River. And, you know, we've had the Legacy Florida Act putting $200 million a year into the environment, as well as having $50 million this year to restore, you know, the dike down there to make sure that this can mitigate the problems, if not, you know, eradicate it. I think one thing we need to do on the budget is making sure we look at home health care, moving away from institutional care and allowing people to care for their loved ones at their home where it can be more affordable and in a better quality of life for all involved.
All right, Mr. Olszewski, the next question. At the state level, how do you balance competing interests between large businesses and corporations and small family operations? Many policies that work for one don't necessarily work for the other.
Well, I've just only been up there 1 year, and I can tell you that the focus of the Florida legislature, particularly the House, is making sure that a high tide raises all boats. And we're not picking winners and losers. We're making sure that we have policies that benefit everyone, and making sure that the small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy, the backbone of in our district. I know we mentioned, you know, big theme parks that get a lot of the attention, but I can assure you there's so many smaller businesses that on an everyday basis have provide the backbone of our economy. And believe it or not, the two highest zip codes in the state of Florida for sales tax revenue happen right here in District 44 because of small businesses and large businesses working together, making sure that we have an economy where we can, you know, grow our families, grow our businesses, and add to our quality of life.
Your chance now, Mrs. Thompson, regarding this, and how do you balance competing interests between large businesses, corporations, small family operations? Many policies, as I said, work for one, don't work for another.
As I mentioned in my opening, we have given millions of dollars to attract large corporations to the state of Florida. We've given them all kind of incentives. They will open their doors, close them relatively quickly, and they leave after having gotten our tax dollars, and there's no provision to claw back. I would like to see us focus funds on improving and undergirding the businesses that are already here. Rather than going out of state and saying, you know, this is what we can provide if you will come to Florida. Let's not neglect the small businesses that have tremendous responsibility for employment. And it's small businesses that provide the bulk of the jobs in the community where they operate. And that's one of the reasons that I've always supported women and minority businesses, because they tend to hire people who have been shut out for a very long time.
I got the sense, Bobby, that you wanted to comment regarding that. Is that accurate? Do you feel as though we should not give that money to companies to move to Florida to the level that your opponent is talking about?
Well, you just look at the record, the leadership that we've had under Speaker Richard Corcoran, and we, are against making sure that these companies are getting these handouts. We look at our local issue that we just faced here with Sanford Burnham. We invested a lot of local dollars to attract them, and now they're gone. Now part of the University of Central Florida, which is fortunate for UCF, but those, those loss of tax dollars and incentives, I think, government needs to get out of the role of business, allow business and the free market principles to work. I mean, you have to make sure we have policies in place that are going to attract businesses, but letting the businesses flourish on their own.
What is your response to that, Sanford Burnham? That one hurt. That was a lot of taxpayer money that just vanished.
Well, he agrees with me. And fortunately, the state is beginning to look at all of the incentives that are given and to see that it's not having the result that we wanted it to have. And so now it's time to move into a different direction.
Okay, very good. Next question, Mrs. Thompson, District 44, about evenly split between Republicans, Democrats, and nonpartisan voters. When voting in Tallahassee, how will you balance your party affiliation against a local electorate where 2/3 of the residents are not going to be in your party?
Well, I have always exercised independence. The incumbent in the position now votes with his party over 90% of the time. I think you have to look at the issue and make a determination in terms of how it impacts your community. During that one session, he voted for preemption to say that we will take away authority from our county commission, our city commissions, our school board, and give those authorities to Tallahassee, preempt decision making. So I will look at the community and serve the entire community rather than look at partisan benefit. And this is the first time that a Democrat has seriously competed in House District 44, because it has been so gerrymandered that a Democrat has never been competitive. And after redistricting, you're absolutely right. We have a district that is almost balanced. 1/3 of which people who are disenchanted with the party system and want to see us work beyond party lines.
All right, so 90% of the time, your opponent says you vote along party lines. Will that be the case if you're reelected?
I'm a true statesman. I served as a Winter Garden Commissioner in a nonpartisan office. I served as the Orange County Community Action Board Chairman, serving all impoverished communities throughout Orange County. My record of reaching across the aisle is well documented. Of the 6 bills that I had, 2 of them I co-sponsored with my Senate companion, Senator Linda Stewart, and State Senator Victor Torres. So I've worked across the aisle. The Orlando Sentinel called me out and said bravo to a state legislator, Bobby O, for bucking both parties, making sure that we have presentment transaction bills. I was the only Republican not to vote for that bill because I am a statesman and do what's best for the community. And when it comes down to home rule, I'm a former Winter Garden Commissioner, served there 4 years. The Florida League of Cities, out of 160 legislators in the Florida legislature, only 17 received an award, a Legislative Appreciation Award, for defending home rule. And I was one of those 17 out of 160. So I think, when you look at the Orlando Sentinel and look at the award from the Florida League of Cities, I'll go by my record.
All right, so the next question actually ties into what you just touched on, home rule. Mr. Olszewski, what do you believe is the right balance of power between the state government and laws that you'll make in Tallahassee if elected, and the power of local leaders. You actually were one of them. You touched on it here in Central Florida to take community, not state-based action.
Well, as a Winter Garden commissioner, you look at what we've accomplished and how far Winter Garden has come. I grew up in the Dr. Phillips community, and now Winter Garden, when I was in office, has been the highest property value growth every year in office, and now basically a gem in the state of Florida that other municipalities are trying to emulate. And we were able to do that with local control and local policy making that made sense for that local community. At the same time, the state of Florida does have a responsibility to make sure that you're dealing with high-level policy that can benefit all 67 counties and I believe 426 cities that we have in the state of Florida. So your legislature needs to allow the local municipalities and counties to do what they need to do, but at the same time, there's always going to be bad actors and there's always going to be people that are going to be pushing the limits, and we need to make sure that our economy for every Floridian is solid. And that's why sometimes Tallahassee has to get involved, but everything needs to go through the local community and the power of home rule that I've lived by.
All right, you get a chance, Mrs. Thompson, to talk about what he said or discuss your own thoughts on home rule.
Well, it is surprising that he comes from a city commission, but he goes to Tallahassee and preempts to Tallahassee the decisions regarding whether or not you can develop 3 miles from a university, and whether or not city county commissioners can put a ban on plastic straws or enact gun restrictions. So while he got an award from a state organization, locally, there are local elected officials who feel that he has lost his way. I have been endorsed by Republican mayors, Rusty Johnson of Ocoee, Republican Mayor Kathy Stark of Oakland. I have been endorsed by former County Commissioner Scott Boyd. These are all Republican individuals who are part of his party and other elected officials who do not feel that he is reflecting what's best for this community in Tallahassee, but rather working to curry favor with party leadership.
All right, lots said there. I'd like you to have a chance to rebut that. You'll have another 30 after he responds.
I can assure you, Greg, and all the voters of District 44 that the city of Ocoee and the city of Oakland had no problem with me when I brought back over $2.6 million of appropriations and working with them to make sure that they had the help that they needed and the infrastructure improvements that they needed for Health Central Hospital and their water treatment center. And I think it's also interesting that she brings up Republicans when there's not a single Democrat that's endorsed her.
Your response.
I have been endorsed by Senator Randolph Bracey, Senator Victor Torres, former County Mayor Linda Chapin. I have bipartisan support, but the reason I wanted to bring up the fact that many of the Republicans in House District 44 have endorsed me is that they are, even though they are Republicans, they're looking at who will be the most effective individual in this district. And he talks about Oakland. The initiative to move Oakland to a sanitary water system away from septic tanks was one that I started in 2012 and brought over $2 million to $100,000 that he keeps talking about in this last session.
All right, that's enough on that topic. Our next segment, last question of this segment, deals with something that every politician that sat in these chairs has brought up one way or the other. 1992 Sadowski Act established a trust fund to develop affordable housing programs in the state of Florida through taxes on real estate transactions. The state legislature has consistently allocated the funds and some of that money to fill other budgetary holes. First question on this is for you, Mrs. Thompson. Would you support legislation that protects the Sadowski Fund for its intended use?
I would absolutely support legislation that protects the Sadowski Fund. It is a trust fund, and we need to put trust back into that particular pot of money that has been swept into other purposes. And that's why we're having such a challenge in terms of affordable housing, not only in District 44, but all of Central Florida. Orlando now has a situation where people who are not in the very top, they don't have a place to live. They don't have a place where they can afford. There was a recent development locally through Lift Orlando that had about 200 units and had 800 applicants, people trying to find affordable housing. And we also have a problem with homelessness. And people don't understand that there's an economic cost to homelessness, because those are people who end up in the emergency rooms and our tax dollars have to take care of them. They end up in our penal system and we have to take care of them. So there's an economic cost.
Pay me now or pay me later is what I
Exactly.
think everyone agrees with
Yes.
on something like that. Sadowski Act, is it being rated by the state? Would you protect it for its intended use?
Well, the intended use is making sure that it's there to invest in affordable housing. And just this year, the legislature made sure through the Florida Housing Financing Corporation, $124 million to go for affordable housing. What I think is very important about this is the state of Florida can fund this, but it's up to local home rule for the local municipalities and local counties to actually invest that money into development projects. Look at what we've done in Winter Garden, where I served as a District 3 commissioner representing East Winter Garden, having that investment there to enhance adding new homes, adding affordable homes into that area. It's up to the local municipalities and counties to make sure that once the Sadowski funds are there, that they're actually being utilized for their intended purposes on the local level.
It's interesting that you might have to put forth legislation to protect legislation that was passed. I want to ask both of you this question. Would you spearhead, sponsor legislation to protect all of that money that it was intended for?
I would absolutely support that, because that's a critical component in our community, making sure that we have affordable housing for our community, our families, and our workers.
Your turn.
I would absolutely support it. We have seen that Central Florida has a major homeless problem.
I would
And
say
a lot of-
crisis.
Yeah, it's a crisis, and a lot of those people simply don't have the money. They don't have money for, let's say they have the money for the rent, but they don't have the money for the down payment. And that's something that the Sadowski Fund was supposed to assist with, but it's been shifted into other areas. So I would absolutely support that.
Okay, both candidates would support putting something in place to protect that pot of money. We're going to take another short break. We'll be back to ask the candidates questions about how much of your tax dollars should go to companies looking to open shop in Florida, and what can our leaders do to manage the state's population growth. Those issues and more coming up next. Welcome back here again with State House District 44 candidates Geraldine Thompson and Robert Bobbio Olszewski. Thanks for being here for this debate. We're touching on a lot of really important issues. So we're going to start here, and I believe this is for you, Bobbio, as first in this segment. Where do you stand on Enterprise Florida? We kind of touched on that in the first segment, and similar economic development organizations. Would you vote to continue funding Enterprise Florida, which received $16 million in the 2017-2018 budget? In the next budget cycle, would you support it?
Well, I think Enterprise Florida has a unique opportunity and role in our state. Obviously, the fight for Enterprise Florida happened in the session before I got there. And I think what it does is it allows the message for the state of Florida to tell the business community and tell people that Florida is open for business, and we need to do what we can to attract businesses here to Florida. But what I think we need to do is in the model of what we do for Visit Florida, making sure that a high tide raises all boats. So we're promoting our state and our no state income tax and incentives that benefit everybody, from the big corporation to the mom and pop, because that's what you do when you're trying to have true economic development, is making sure that everyone can flourish from the decisions that you make. And so that's why I believe that Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida have that role to making sure that they can attract and have the message for Florida being open for business, a great place to visit, a great place to raise your family, and to have a good income.
All right, perfectly, 60 seconds, right on the number. Now for you, Mrs. Thompson, where do you stand on Enterprise Florida, similar economic development organizations? Would you vote to continue funding them? I talked about that $16 million amount that's funded through 2017-2018.
I think there has to be more accountability if we're talking about additional funding. What I found in the legislature was that we did fund Enterprise Florida, but we had very little information about how those funds were used. And in fact, the last funding request that they made when I was in the state Senate, they had not spent the money that had been awarded the year before. And when we're talking about Visit Florida had contracts that were secret, that they said were confidential. And we found out that they had $1 million contract with Pitbull to attract people to come to Florida. There has to be transparency. There has to be more accountability. These are taxpayer dollars. They're not the private funds, slush funds for these agencies and these institutions. And so there has to be some reporting back in terms of how the money has been spent and whether it's been effective in terms of what it was supposed to do.
Has it been misused, Bobby?
I think you look at the track record that we've had under Speaker Richard Corcoran and what we're going to have in Speaker Designated and Jose Oliva. You're talking about true business capitalists that don't want to have the handouts. And the accountability absolutely was measured. I mean, I look at what the legislature has done in the 10 years previously that allowed these contracts to go on for so long, and now here we fixed them. I mean, we're making sure that the transparency is there for Visit Florida, Enterprise Florida, making sure that we are getting our investment dollars because we've been burned like we've seen here locally with Sanford Burnham.
Do you agree with that? Has the state done enough? Have you found that the adjustments that have been made in Tallahassee have taken it to the level you'd like to see it?
I think we're moving in the right direction. I think there is more accountability, there is more oversight, and so that you don't have people who feel that they have absolute carte blanche to do with these dollars whatever they would like to do. That was not in place. So when Representative says that they have fixed it, I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think that more needs to be done.
Very good. Mrs. Thompson, next question for you. A state representative can only propose, as we know from talking about it in the first segments, 6 bills. What are your top priorities if you are elected in 2018?
One is to look at the incentive programs that we have been discussing. One is to look at health care and to expand Medicaid. I am a breast cancer survivor and I'm wearing my colors today. When I went through
Congratulations
thank
on
you
that.
so much. When I went through chemotherapy, I went every Friday and I sat next to a young woman who told me that she was sleeping at a friend's house on the sofa because she had no insurance and she had to sell her home in order to pay for her treatments. And that should not happen in the richest country in the world. And we have sent tax dollars to the federal government, our dollars from the state of Florida, that have now gone to benefit people in other states when they could be benefiting the 800,000 people in the state of Florida. So I would want to expand Medicaid. I'm also interested in the environment and would want to see us tighten up the nutrients that are flowing into our waterways. I've been endorsed by the Florida conservation voters because of my strong stance on the environment.
All right, now your turn. 6 bills you get, that's all they allow.
Right.
What would they be?
Well, I think our main focus needs to be on education. I mean, my mom taught for 30 years in Orange County Public Schools at West Orange and Dr. Phillips High School. My wife goes to school every day teaching at an elementary school in Horizon West. I have a 2-year-old daughter. We had a record investment in education this year at $24 billion with over $100 per student increase over the previous year. And a bill that I would file is an Education, Career, and Promotion Act is what I'm looking to do, making sure that we have making the career and education more affordable for folks that want to become teachers, because it's a wonderful profession. And we need to make sure also on a follow-up bill, we had the school safety bill, transformational bill that kept our students and our teachers and staff safer. We need to make sure we go back to that and make those improvements so that we can ensure that our students, teachers, and staff are safe at schools.
All right, let's go to the next line of questioning. Bobby O, what specific changes does the Central Florida economy need in order to benefit a larger number of citizens, families, businesses, and how can you accomplish that in the state legislature?
Well, what we can do is, making sure that government has policies that will allow families and businesses and individuals to flourish. We do that by having a world-class education, like I said. We invested $24 billion, a record, making sure that we're preparing our students today for the jobs of tomorrow. And we hear a lot about a living wage, and we see what the Walt Disney World Company did. They announced a $15 minimum wage, and what happened? Amazon followed suit a couple of weeks later. And so we see what happens when we have private companies investing in themselves and allowing the economic principles and free market principles to take shape. And that's what's going to happen. What we need to do is making sure we have policies in place that are going to attract more companies to make the decisions to come here. We can't put a stop sign at our borders to stop people from coming. Our growth is going to happen, but we need to have smart growth working with issues that affect both our development and transportation like we previously discussed.
Okay, so Mrs. Thompson, you can touch on that. Florida economy, what do we need to do to help a larger number of people?
We need to make sure that there is a livable wage. There are people who are working 2 jobs and still qualify for public assistance, whether that is supplemental nutrition, food stamps, whether that's public housing, transportation, whatever. So rather than having the businesses pay a living wage, we are subsidizing those individuals who don't make a living wage through our public tax dollars. And just very recently, the Orlando International Airport looked at the bag handlers, the service employees, et cetera, and they were making in the range of $5, a little more than $5.
$5.23 an hour.
Right, and sometimes they got tips and sometimes they didn't. So I think making sure, and we, of course, we have a service economy, but making sure that everybody makes a livable wage and can live off of the wage that they earn and that they take home.
Okay, so kind of a yes or no. Do you think that it should be across the board $15 an hour?
I think it should be graduated, but I think that in a very short period of time, we should reach $15 an hour.
I believe in free market capitalism and principles, and I believe private businesses should make the decision on what they pay their employees.
All right, so Mrs. Thompson, in the wake of the Stoneman Douglas school shootings in Parkland earlier this year, and of course the Pulse nightclub shooting 2 years ago in Orlando, what public policy do you think needs to be implemented, if any, to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands?
Well, we need universal background checks. Today, you can buy a gun at a gun show, and you don't have to have a background check. You can buy it from a private citizen. You don't have to have. We need to close those loopholes. And I see no reason why a private individual needs a military assault weapon and a magazine of ammunition with enough rounds to kill hundreds of people. We certainly have the right to protect our person and our property, but do we need an Uzi or an AK-47 to do that? I've been designated by Moms Demand Action as a gun sense candidate, while Mr. Olszewski has an A rating by the NRA. We cannot allow the gun lobby to dictate policy in the state of Florida. And we shouldn't have to have our children leading the way. We have young people now from schools who are saying we want to feel safe, and somebody has to be the adult in the room, and we have failed at this point.
All right, so Mr. Olszewski, in the wake of the Stoneman Douglas shooting, Parkland, Pulse, do you think there needs to be something more done in Tallahassee to switch our laws, to change our policies?
We've made the most transformative public safety and gun safety bill the state of Florida has ever seen in about 2 weeks after the tragedy on February 14th. And there is no doubt that we made schools safer by making sure that it is more difficult to get your hands on a weapon if you have a mental illness, making sure that different governmental agencies, from the sheriff, from the school board, from the FBI, can all communicate with each other when there's a problem. We did ban bump stocks. And my opponent mentioned Uzis and AK-47s. Those are military assault weapons, and they are banned. They are illegal. So if she thinks that they're illegal, she really doesn't understand this issue on Uzis and AK-47s. But at the same time, what we've done is we prevented guns getting in the hand of mentally ill people, $400 million investment, making sure that the agencies can talk to one another to make sure this never happens again. And we're going to have to go back to that next year to make sure we dotted every I and crossed every T.
You know, people have the semantics of this, and I know that she used 2 weapons that are banned, if you will, but assault-style weapons are not banned.
It was just an example.
Very fair enough, and that's what I'm bringing to the table here. So assault-style weapons, do you think they should be banned?
Military-grade assault weapons are banned in the United States. I don't know what an assault-style weapon is, but if it's a semi-automatic weapon for one pull, one bullet, those are legal in the United States, and they're illegal here in the state of Florida under the Constitution of the Second Amendment.
Omar Mateen's weapon was a legal weapon, purchased legally, and Nicholas Cruz, also a legal weapon under the current state statutes.
And they were legally purchased. And we made sure for Nicholas Cruz that if this happened again, Nicholas Cruz would not have gotten his hands on that weapon, because all the problems and all the warning signs that he would have had on mental health care issues would have been identified early, and making sure that he would not have been able to carry that out because he'd have gotten the help that he needed. And particularly with purchasing that weapon, he would not be able to purchase the weapon that he used under the School Safety Act that the Florida legislature just passed.
Before your response, would you outlaw large magazine weapons?
No.
Your response?
I would outlaw those large magazines. I don't see why they are necessary.
All right, next line of questioning. Mr. Olszewski, how can public policy expand across your district to decrease transportation-related or traffic-related incidents? What will you do as a state rep to address this issue?
One of the things I've already done is pass a bill off the House floor to make sure that our MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations throughout the state are on the same page with their long-range plans, making sure that we can identify transportation funding sources to keep our streets safer. And in particularly, I've worked with the International Drive Chamber of Commerce already, and different groups that have an interest in International Drive, making sure that we can keep our pedestrian and traffic safe on our main tourist corridors. But at the same time, we have our tourist corridors. We have to make sure our commute to and from school and work are just as safe. And I would say, look at what we've done in Winter Garden. With the record that I've had as a commissioner, and using traffic calming devices and being able to make smart investments, not only locally but through the state, to make sure that we can keep our residents safe on their commute, and investing in transportation infrastructure, which we are #1 with the state of Florida.
All right, we also are #1 in the Orlando area in terms of pedestrian deaths. This is a dangerous place to be walking. What sort of policies do you think should be addressed in Tallahassee as it relates to keeping the public safe?
One of the bills that I sponsored was to create a pedestrian walkway over Silver Star Road, particularly because you have young people going to Evans High School. You also have residents, and that was not funded. So I think we're going to have to look at ways to protect pedestrians, whether they are residents or whether they are visitors. And along the I-Drive area, you see many pedestrian walkways, because that's something that's been proven to be effective. We're also going to have we have to have better lighting so that people can be seen. We have to educate people. If you're going to be on the roadways on a bicycle, for example, you need reflective garments, you need lights, etc., so that we don't continue to have the label as the worst place for pedestrians.
All right, we're going to continue. We have one more segment here. We'll cover the issues of state support for public charter and private schools, and how tourist development tax dollars should be spent. Those and a lightning round of rapid fire questions and answers coming up in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back to our final segment of this special debate between the candidates for State House District 44, Republican incumbent Robert Bobbio Olszewski and Democratic challenger Geraldine Thompson. Thank you both for taking part in this debate. We hope it has been informative for our viewers and voters of this district, an important district, as all of them are. Okay, first question, last segment. Mrs. Thompson, there are both private and public schools in your district, of course. What do you think is the role of the state regarding support for public, charter, and private schools? And what will you do in the State House regarding your stance on this?
Well, I'm a former educator, and I know that one size does not fit all. So I think that there's a place for charters. I think that there has to be accountability, and that any organization, any learning institution that takes public tax dollars ought to compete on a level playing field. We see In our traditional public schools, for example, testing requirements, we see curriculum requirements, we see teachers who must be certified. Those things are not in place in many of the voucher-supported schools, many of the charter schools where there is lack of accountability. We see, for example, that there are institutions where there's no library and students don't have access to what they would have access to in a traditional public schools. And we see those schools folding and then the students going back in traditional public schools, and they're so far behind that it takes a great deal of effort to bring them back to the level where they're supposed to be.
Okay, so Bobby, private public schools, where do you stand on that funding of the private schools, the voucher program, and those sorts of things?
Well, I'm a proud graduate of Orange County Public Schools. I already mentioned my family's investment in Orange County Public Schools. Public education is great, but so is private school, so is charter school, homeschool, and Florida Virtual School. It's up to the parents, and we're here to empower the parents to make the best educational choice for their child, because every child is unique and has a unique situation. At the same time, we need to make sure that the standards are the same, but a lot of these charter schools, most of the charter schools are, have a board, a private board of the parents that are there making sure that these decisions are met and there is accountability. And we're making sure that these schools have accountability with the funds that they're getting from the state of Florida. And it comes down to, do you think that an investment of state funds should follow the child or go to a bureaucrat? And so I think that it's empowering the parents to know that their child's education is funded and that money goes with the child, just like what we've been able to do in giving them an opportunity with the Hope Scholarship that we were able to pass this year for children that have been bullied, allowing them to have a choice on where they can have their kids to go to school.
Should state-funded schools, whether it's a charter or private, have to be on the exact same in terms of the accountability that a public school is on? Would you agree with that, that the differences in accountability does exist?
The accountability needs to be there for all schools in the state of Florida, no question.
And do you think that there's disparity there? Is the voucher program or the private school sector taking advantage of the system right now by getting these kids to transfer, getting that state funding, and then not delivering?
Well, there are a lot of private organizations that are operating voucher schools, and that's a way to line the pockets of private business with public tax dollars. And as I said before, there is no accountability. This bill that the incumbent voted for, that would allow a student to transfer from a traditional public school to a voucher school if the child says he or she has been bullied. Public schools have had to have policies in place for years to deal with bullying, and they are graded based on how effectively they implement those policies. So this is not needed, and is another way to line the pockets of private business.
What is your stance? You did vote for that. If you're bullied, you can transfer, but does that address the bully, or does that address the victim?
I know something about being bullied. I can relate to that. Particularly bullying comes in a lot of form, whether it's on social media or physically or emotionally. And if your child comes home crying every day because they've been, harassed constantly over and over again, I will say that Orange County Public Schools does a great job with their bullying programs, and they do a wonderful job.
But should the bully be moved instead of the student? Because you voted to allow someone to transfer just if they claim bullying.
There has to be a documented, what has to happen, you have to have it documented through the school, and the school has a right and a responsibility, not more of a right, of responsibility to try to fix the problem. And so there's no, it's not someone's making an accusation that's not founded. The school has to work with the parent and the child to try to resolve the situation. But if that situation can't be resolved and that child's going to be tormented going to school, what parent wouldn't want the best for their child to be able to have an opportunity to enjoy their life and get an education? So again, does that money follow the child, or does it follow the school? Or does it go to the school? I think it goes to the child, to where the parent and the child make the best educational choice for them and their future.
Your response to that?
Well, as I said, it does nothing to solve the problem of bullying, because the public schools throughout the 67 counties have had to develop policy, implement policy, and be graded on policy to deal with bullying. So when you saturate the reasons that you're going to give money to voucher schools, you say a child who who has a mental or physical impairment. You go down the line and then you come up with, wow, how about bullying? So it's another way, as I've said before, for private businesses where there's no accountability to get public tax dollars at the expense of 95% of the students who remain in the traditional public school.
And not all school systems have the anti-bullying policy that we do at Orange County Public Schools. And if your child is coming home in tears every day for being bullied and tormented, I think as a parent, you're going to do everything you can for your child. And I'm honored to vote for that Hope Scholarship to give hope to those children that are bullied and harassed.
And the bullying policy doesn't apply just to Orange County. It applies to all 67 counties. They had to develop the policy. The representative has suggested on a number of occasions that there are things that I don't understand. I understand certainly the difference between a bill and an appropriation. I understand the difference between giving taxpayer dollars for private business. He was part of an operation called Certified Second Chance that was organized to deal with ex-felons and re-entry, an area where he has no experience or background that I could see. But yet, Certified Second Chance sought $500,000 of Florida taxpayer dollars for this private business. Very similar to what we're seeing now, shifting dollars, public taxpayer dollars, into private enterprise.
Defense with a rebuttal to that.
Well, I've been asked to join a number of boards in my professional and political career, and having an opportunity for felons to get a job to provide for their families. Ms. Thompson talked repeatedly about homelessness and the ability to get a good paying job. And this organization was simply there to help people get a job and be certified to be able to be employed by an employer so they could get up and go to work every day. And that appropriation request was sponsored by State Senator Randy Bracey and State Senator Camilla Brown, and as it would benefit their district.
All right, so go ahead.
It was not a board. The business papers for Certified Second Chance show that he was a partner, and when the appropriations request was completed, it was completed by Representative Bobby Olszewski.
Did you profit from that?
No, sir, I'm no longer on that board.
Wasn't a board. The business papers show him as a principal of Certified Second Chance.
Big accusations here, your defense.
Well, this came up in the last election, and it's been proven false. I joined a board, and when I ran for the State House, I resigned my position from the board. I made no money. I was asked to help them with a business plan. I gave my suggestion. It was never my company. I had nothing to do with it.
All right, very good. Final question here in this segment, Mr. Olszewski, before we get to the lightning round. Do you believe that the uses of tourist development tax as established by the state legislature should be extended to local needs? It would really be in your wheelhouse in District 44 to help with law enforcement, roads, transportation, maybe even pedestrian safety. That TDT, do you think it should be tapped into to help those areas that are feeling taxed, pardon the pun, by all these visitors?
Well, the tourist development tax was created by legislature for the hospitality community, and I think that needs to be a dedicated funding source to make sure that we are able to promote our family-friendly atmosphere that helps us get 72 million visitors a year, and it needs to be protected to make sure that we have the ability to raise, the revenue that we do. Like I mentioned, 2 of the highest zip codes in the whole state on sales tax revenue come from right here in District 44. So these businesses are already paying a wealth of property taxes. We mentioned the 3 theme parks, the convention center, and then all the businesses on International Drive. This would almost be a double taxation if we would take a tax that has been set up for them and allowing them to pay even more on top of the taxes that they already are paying, which again are a record for our community and a record for our district.
Mrs. Thompson, same question for you, your response.
Well, I think tourism development tax dollars is an evolving area. And we have seen at one time a designation for just the convention center, for example. And now we see those dollars being used for aquariums and for a Pulse Museum and other things. So I think there's an evolution involved here. And we can't just say that based on where it started, that's where it needs to end. And when I was in the Florida Senate, in the Panhandle, we did allow tourism development tax dollars to be used for public safety, for roads, for other things that tourists use, because tourists want to feel safe when they come here. So it may be that we need to examine it, and certainly the bulk of it has been and will be and should be continued to be focused on developing tourism, because that's what brings the money in the first place, the bed tax. But I think it is an evolution.
All right, we're going to continue now with our 9 rapid fire questions. I'm going to try to get you all to answer yes or no, or as brief as possible. Let's attempt that. We'll begin with Mrs. Thompson. Number 1, do you believe there is a legislative means of improving workplace diversity?
Oh, absolutely, there is.
And Bobby?
Sure.
Okay. Should teachers, Bobby, be allowed to carry guns at school?
They are not in the bill. It was never in the bill.
Your reaction?
It was absolutely in the bill, and Orange County Public Schools had to take official action to opt out. They wouldn't have taken action if it was not in the bill.
I know it's rapid fire. I apologize, Greg, but I mean, this is where we need to read the bill and not the hashtag. In that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school safety bill, it clearly states that anyone whose primary role is in the classroom is not able to be a part of the Guardian program.
Okay, we're not talking about the bill. We're talking about moving forward. So I'm going to ask you again, should teachers be allowed to carry guns at school?
No.
No.
Okay. Bobby, would you support a ban on assault rifles?
No.
Yes.
Should single-use non-biodegradable products such as plastic straws be banned, Mrs. Thompson?
I think that's up to local governments, and that was one of the problems with the preemption bill that Representative Olszewski voted for, that would say that local elected officials could not put a ban on plastic straws.
Yes or no?
I would support a ban on plastic because it's not biodegradable.
Yes or no?
No.
No, you would not support a ban on plastic straws.
It's a private decision. The private company can make up their own mind.
Okay, Mr. Olszewski, currently a police officer cannot pull you over for just texting while driving. Do you support allowing police officers to pull people over as the primary offense?
Yes, proud to co-sponsor that bill.
Yes.
Okay, there's 2 on that. Do you support, Mrs. Thompson, a wage increase for teachers?
Absolutely. Teachers are highly underpaid.
Bobby?
Yes, we had $230 million for that purpose this year in the budget.
Bobby O, do you support the expansion of medical and recreational cannabis?
Medical, yes. Recreational, no.
I think yes.
Expansion on both?
Yes, I think that we're at a point where this country was with prohibition,
Okay.
and so I think yes.
Okay, do you believe, Mrs. Thompson, there's a legislative solution to address rising health care cost?
A legislative.
Is there something the legislature can do?
Yes, we can fund it on the front end rather than subsidizing it through the emergency rooms on the back end.
Mr. Olszewski, can we
Yes.
help? All right, final question on these 9. Do you consider health care to be a fundamental right of all Americans, Mr. Olszewski?
Fundamental right to health care coverage, no.
It's a fundamental right.
Okay, very good. All right, we now go to our final 2 minutes each for closing statements. Mrs. Thompson, you get to go first. Your camera is right there, camera number 3.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to participate. There are things that a legislator really should be very clear about, and one is character, transparency, and following the law. A lot of questions have been raised about the representative's campaign headquarters. His treasurer's reports show no expenditures for a campaign site. And in terms of contributions, there are no, it does not reflect any in-kind donation for a campaign site. And if people want to find him, they simply go down Dr. Phillips, and all of these signs are in front of his legislative office. And you should not use public tax dollars for political and personal purposes. And so I think that in addition to understanding the difference between a bill and an appropriation and having read legislation before you sign off on it, you should make sure you are following the law and not even have the appearance, because there are people who have faced criminal charges for misuse of public funds for private purposes. And after 10 years, I have seen, unfortunately, people who cross the line. And I bring to this candidacy a decade of working in the Florida legislature, understanding what the rules are and abiding by the rules. The representative has made an issue of where I live. Because of my husband's profession, my street address is not open to public scrutiny because there are people who might want to do harm to our family because of his profession. And so I am following the law, and it has been suggested that I am not. And I bring my experience, my commitment to this candidacy, have the backing bipartisan of people in our community who want us to see us move forward rather than backward.
Okay, your 2 minutes are up. Thank you very much. Mr. Olszewski, your turn to address camera 4.
And I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Again, my name is Robert Bobby O. Olszewski, and I would be honored for your vote on or before November the 6th. And my opponent is correct. Following the law is important, as she has been accused in the past of financial improprieties with her campaign contributions. And for 10 years, my opponent absolutely does live in the Windermere and Gotha area of House District 44, but she never lived in her House district and her Senate district. So for over a decade, she willingly and knowingly broke the law and not living in the district that she represented. And I am someone who has a track record with the city of Winter Garden as a commissioner, as a state representative for a year, bringing results back to my community in a bipartisan fashion, being a true statesman. I'm not going to be a radical partisan looking to score points and hashtags in social media. I'm looking to serve the people. And I'm proud to have over $24 billion of investments into education. We made the Bright Future Scholarship permanent, so your hardworking students can go to college without any payments, and we included textbooks into that. We made sure that we're making the investments in our future, and our future starts with our kids. And I'm honored to be able to have voted for the School Safety Act that made every student, teacher, and staff member safe at a school by investing into mental health care funding over $400 million to make sure that we're talking with the authorities and identifying problems before they become tragedies. And my track record is one of transparency, fighting for what's truth, fighting for what's right, and I would be honored for your vote. I ask you to go to my website, votebobbyo.com. Feel free to go online to check out the bills that I passed. Feel free to go online to the Florida Department of Elections to see all my campaign reports, because I am an open book. I would be honored for your vote. Please vote Bobby O, as I am a statesman for all the people in District 44.
All right, very good. Thank you both for being here and spending so much of your valuable time. I know that typically at this time you're knocking on doors and campaigning, and hopefully this was valuable for our viewers. That's who we're trying to serve here.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that. And again, I want to thank both of the teams for being here, both candidates, Mr. Olszewski and Mrs. Thompson. We appreciate that they both agreed to debate here in our studio. Not all candidates have agreed to debate publicly, so we applaud you for answering these questions that we believe will better inform Central Floridians living in District 44 and beyond. And thanks to our partner, the Commission on Local Debates, for co-producing this debate. And finally, thank you for watching today. This show will stay posted on WFTV.com throughout our election season, along with 4 other debates we have held this election season right here in our studio. Again, thank you both. Best of luck in November, and thank you again for watching. Take care.
Thank you.